Hello, this is the Harboring Light. I'm Mary. I give a conservative take about the world around me. So this episode is all about the social aspects and the impact, along with the impact of coffee shops, particularly in Western culture. And so I'm going to talk about this from a different point of views and, of course, present the facts and the history, along with the corporate business side of it, and then the entertainment, culture, social side of it too, as far as from my era, my generation growing up from the 90s, particularly with shows like Friends. There's a lot of shows you can count. A list of shows, but from off the top of my head, Friends comes to mind because it centers the main focus, versus the other shows. A focus in on the aspect of coffee shops and in the New York experience, so to speak. And so, of course, I'm going to give my thoughts along with all of this. All right, so let's dig in. And also, before I start, so I haven't posted. The supporters, I appreciate you who support and click my link to support my channel. Well, my podcast, my channel, because, I'm working that in too, because I post on my content on YouTube, so it's all that lingo mixed in. So on there, listeners support the content. I give more of a personal touch and more. It's called Messages in the Bottle, the Harboring Light. And so I got one episode loaded up there, and on Sundays, I'm going to post. So I'm going to tease it right now. So next Sunday, I'm going to give my extended thoughts and uncensored thoughts about P. Diddy and the saga that's going. Well, I wouldn't say saga. What should have happened so much longer than what's going on. All the criminal acts that are coming out to play, he finally Judgment Day for that. And you want to hear all of that? Become a supporter. You could hear, I'm going to do everything from current events on there for the listener supporter only episodes, all the way to my thoughts about cooking, which that's the first episode, and giving my tips too, along with dating advice, my perspective about marital importance in society and how that is the betterment of society and all of those things. All right, so here we go. Let's get into everything. Okay, so as I was mentioning, this part, I'm just giving my thoughts, and then I'm going to expel more about the facts and the next segment. But now I'm just centering around my thoughts. So as I was stating about Friends, of course, yes, there were shows in the 90s, particularly about centering around coffee shops, but not to the extent as Friends. So, for instance, Paris in contrast, Frasier, shows like Frasier. So Frasier centered mostly around which is, I find it funny and interesting that, Paramount, particularly CBS Studios, picked up Frasier and rehashing it for this generation. And so it's quite interesting with the dynamic with Frasier's son, Freddie, and the Frasier's son's perspective about the world versus his father, and how, they're commingling their ideas and trying to see, and then, learning from each other. And then it's quite funny. And so if you're interested, any of y'all that are interested in a Frasier series, or that you are interested in the new generation of Frasier, check that on our Paramount Plus. So, I'm not getting paid from Paramount Plus or anything. I just, if you're interested, give them a plug. I think that's a good thing to do. All right, so, in Frasier, it makes more of a commentary about the downfall, and how being pretentious and aloof, how that, unfolds in your life. And then the aspect of these people, they're older, they're more into their perspectives about how they want to live their lives. And then bringing back in the aspects of how their father is, salt to the earth versus they're not, and how that clashes with how they maneuver about things. Versus Friends, and they happen, going back to the coffee shop aspect, that going to a coffee shop, it happens to be there, it happens to be involved in their lives. And then, they also up the ante about their sophistication with knowing different things about coffee and things like that. So that's mainly the premise behind Frasier. But when you get into a show like Friends, it was, for better or for worse, it was one of those shows that made a lot of commentary about what it's like to go into the day-to-day and then step out of the day-to-day and make what it would feel as if, when you're young and you're trying to figure out your way, which is quite interesting because that's how everything is displaced. That's another thing to take a look at, how everything is, as far as the age, linear of how these characters fall. So most of them are in their late 20s, tapping on 30. So, but they're maneuvering, for instance, you could beg the argument about, does that have to do with the state of Arrested Development? Are they making commentary on that? What is that all about? But it's quite interesting. The show creators, they also make commentary about that this is the rehashing of their life when they were 20s and in their 20s and young. And then, it's all about, everybody being together and, going to the day-to-day about that and getting through trials and tribulations together and all of it. So, it's one of those things. Maybe that's the mixing of it too. And then it's also another thing to reiterate how, it's quite interesting, particularly from an actorial point of view, that, they, for instance, depicting teenagers on either cinema or on TV, they tend to go with adults to do that. And then, of course, actual teenagers are in the mix, but that's quite that juxtaposition with that's also a thing to bring into the element about this too. You know, what kind of, what is being said about that too. So getting back to friends in the coffee shop. So their lives, for the most part, is centered heavily around the Central Park, this coffee shop. And so you get to the more of the social aspect of entailing about how coffee shops affect the Western culture. And so within it, you see how they talk about relationships. They talk about, in the coffee shop, they make commentary about, you know, eavesdropping and listening to what other people are going through, and then they heighten that into the extent of comedy, and then powerhouses in comedy, the late and great Robin Williams, along with Billy Crystal, making commentary about the downfall that can be with eavesdropping, and and then also making commentary about the aspect of live performances, specifically with music, specifically with Phoebe, and how she makes a note to be a part of the atmosphere in Central Park. And so that also begs another question about, are they making commentary about how, specifically when you get into poetry, that whole, I guess, stereotypical element of what you would expect to be in a coffee shop. Are they adding another comedic relief level to that, to where she is totally oblivious about her talents, but she just wants to display it to the world because she thinks the world needs it? And so it also alludes back to what I was talking about on Saturday with Substack, with how it also interchanges too with the demands of the time. So specifically with how people balance their work life. And so, yeah, that's a lot of commentary to it, with how, and Friends, how they center they center how, what they think about their work. They make commentary about that in the coffee shop, and then in Rachel working for the coffee shop, and then even Joey at one point working for the coffee shop, and then, separating the aspect of them working there versus, making social time. And so that also heightens the perspective of how what people think of from the point of view of how they feel and the disposition of their work social life balance. And so it paints a really good picture of that, of how coffee shops can bring that out of people. And so going back versus a show like Seinfeld, where Seinfeld, they say it's begs the question that it's really a show about nothing. But I would argue no, and I discussed this some time back with my husband too, that I wouldn't say it's really a show about nothing, but I get what the creator was saying, what Larry David was saying about this show about nothing. In the essence, it could be, it looks like a show about nothing because it's not really stricted, not as far as a script point of view of how everything flows. But at the same time, you have all these characters together, and it's all these situations unfolding in their lives, so it is something there. But going back to the coffee shop element, whenever they would go to Tom's Diner, which is a real diner in New York, whenever they would go there, it was again, a place that they would just happen to, that would frequent, but it wasn't a part of their everyday life. It was just happened to be there, and they're just working around it. All right, so here I go. I'm going to go into the factual aspects of coffee shops, particularly in America. All right, of course, this source will be provided for you in this episode. So this is the history of U.S. coffee shop. And I have another article that it dates on other dates. It didn't go as far as this, but it focuses in on the business side, and I'll get to that after I finish this up. So it says the history of the U.S. coffee shop, and it was written January 4th, 2022. Says coffee has been around in the U.S. for centuries, almost as long as the country has existed. But it goes on to say, this is as far as the dating back to 1668. It was brought to New Amsterdam, now known as New York, either by Dutch or by the British. To this day, debates persist over whether the first coffee house in the U.S. was founded, but most argue it was either Boston or New York. So Robert Thurston is a professor of history at Miami University and the author of Coffee from Bean to Barista. He says that as far as he can tell, the correct answer is London Coffee House, which was established in Boston as of 1669. So during the American Revolution, drinking tea was seen as unpatriotic. So this goes back to the British with that ties to that, and taxing of tea, and tied to the American aspect of going against the tyranny of the British tax, and so that's interesting how that unfolds too, and the culture that is brought out of that, going against that, and the American spirit of going against what is unjust, what is not, of true liberties, the liberties and the rights of the American country. And okay, so let me get into the inalienable rights of that. So at this time, most U.S. coffees were also located in New England, and many of them had a clear political affiliation. So where the coffee house was situated, or what it was named, deemed much of its patrons. So for example, the British Coffee House in Boston was frequented by redcoats, which is British soldiers, and other loyalists, while the Green Dragon, also in Boston, was the meeting place for many against the British rule. So, unsurprisingly, after the revolution ended, the British Coffee House was taken over and aptly renamed the American Coffee House. And to add on to this too, so out of these, you get that aspect of how that leads to the political, as far as the political synergy, well, not synergy, the what centers around in the political movements that we see today about coffee houses, particularly with Starbucks, and I'll go on further into that. But it's nice to see how the American roots of standing up against and going against what is seen as not protecting the rights of the Republic of the people, and setting up the aspect of, how that notion of boycotting products and giving respect and patronage and being a patron to products that uphold your political agendas. And so that's even more relatable today. So what am I saying about this? So it's unfortunate pushing these far progressive movements into products that was deemed to be relatively conservative. For instance, well, I'll go into it. So, products like this is an alcoholic beverage. And so, because on the next segment, I'm going to, address even further about Starbucks. But Budweiser and how it dropped in sales because, pushed the agenda that everybody is accepting of transgender ideologies, that this is acceptable for the new identity of what a woman is, and it's going against what you're not really tapping into the consumer. And so Budweiser really paid at the nose for that. And, again, pushing at the roots of this relates to how when you push a political, go too far with a political agenda, and the power of having a real effect on the company, what that does to the longevity of everything. All right, so the American Civil War. After the Revolution, a love of coffee took hold quickly in the all-new United States of America. So it spread quickly over the decades that followed, and by the time the American Civil War broke out in 1861, coffee was standard issue in both Union and Confederate rations. That said, it was more popular for the effects of caffeine rather than the flavor of the coffee itself. The coffee was likely roasted over fire and extremely bitter, and soldiers would also often add other ingredients like chicory or tree bark if they did not have enough coffee or a full cup. Coffee was the drug, so to speak, of the Civil War, Robert says. So it gave people energy and the ability to keep on fighting. It may have the tremendous contribution of the Union's cause. For example, at one stage, the Union naval blade stretched coffee supplies in the South. This meant that Confederate soldiers were actually forced to trade their tobacco, which was plentiful, for coffee from the Union enemies across the border. So coffee for the masses. It wasn't until the late 19th and early 20th century that coffee shops became popular among regular people, as they started to become accessible for those who didn't work in the government or finance. So the rise in popularity was driven somewhat by the fall in the wholesale coffee prices toward the end of the 19th century. This will coincide nicely with the expansion of the U.S. railroad network, which only helped coffee to be more prolific. Soon, coffee was not just widespread, but also affordable, meaning that by the late 19th century, more or less anyone could afford to drink this beverage. So Professor Thurston says as early as the 1870s, there were drawings of coffee breaks among shop girls in New York City, and it spread as tradition fairly quickly. So the famous coffee break in the U.S. office started in the 20s onward. That provided a social setting, a point where people could meet. However, at this time, coffee shops were still relatively uncommon. While cafe societies did emerge in some capacities in the 20s, this actually has more to do with the prohibition than coffee. And, prohibition with banning alcohol and, with that whole aspect of the speakeasies and mobs coming into affiliations and in order to illegally smuggle in alcohol. So, I can see how coffee shops is a break from all of the insanity and mayhem of that. So in the 1920s, this actually had more to do with prohibition than coffee, as the culture centered around more of jazz, dancing, and the bootleg of alcohol. So it wasn't until the excuse me. And, I can see the other coin of that being a hub to, as far as the culture of doing, the word I'm getting at, the subculture, and how that emerged with coffee houses, having a platform for that, or a meeting place, so to speak, for that, for the subculture. So it wasn't until another significant event in the 1920s that the U.S. modern obsession with coffee began. And we're getting into the Great Depression next, and that's coming up. Okay, so the Great Depression. So when the Great Depression hit in 1929, food banks and soup kitchens began handing out coffee and donuts to hungry citizens. So Professor Thurston says that in major cities around the world, this kickstarted the idea of an affordable cup of coffee. So U.S. still wanted a cheap, accessible cup of coffee wherever they went. So in New York City, for instance, it was still possible to get a U.S. cup for $1, a cup of coffee for $1, and one of those blue cup. This is iconic of blue cup. So this was the symbol. It was going around that of the staple of the Americana coffee shop coffee. So, however, it was from what I gather about this. So, coffee culture evolved again in 1941 when the U.S. joined the Second World War. The World War II, or Second World War. Once more, coffee was issued as part of every U.S. soldier's ration, which were supplied by the burgeoning of Maxwell House. However, it was the growth of advertising after the Second World War that really fueled coffee's popularity in the 20th century. Throughout the latter half of the century, newspapers, magazines, and television all began promoting the wonders of coffee to families in the U.S. So advertising was focused on the nuclear family, comprising a hard-working father, a dutiful wife and mother, and rosy-cheeked children. So again, this advertising keying in on that, the importance of the structure of a nuclear family, and then hence that goes to the consumerism and the buying power of what goes on the market and what's suitable, and how that shape shifts to what we see today with the aspect of perpetuating with the aspects of popular coffee shops or popular coffee chains, brands, with centered around youth culture and the highlighting the aspect of being single, things of that nature, how that transition relays itself and translates throughout times, how that unfolds too, with the aspect of the buying power of the consumer in America. And so we're going to go into this aspect and then get into diner coffee. It's no surprise then that coffee adverts from time are angled towards family life. This was a different approach to European coffee adverts at the same area, which instead promoted the class and sophistication of cafes. So, diner coffee. Across U.S. coffee culture, however, one establishment bucks the trend and has persisted in spite of the third wave of coffee. So, this is the diner, a third place, which is now intertwined with how people perceive coffee in the U.S. So, as far back as the early 1900s, diners emerged as places where people could get a cheap meal and drink. So, the third place are where you get the coffee shop, you get home, you get home, coffee shop, and now you have another place, the diner, and the aspect of how that centers around people that specifically in the early, during the 40s and in the 50s. And so how that is another capstone of Americana food and the Americana culture, and how that develops the aspect of food and beverages in the towards the American people, what they think about it. So perhaps because of their affordability, they have persisted to this day. Diner coffee remains a U.S. phenomenon too, and it's commonly associated with dark roast and the automatic filter machines. So coffee shops become widespread. So in the late 1970s, the second wave of coffee emerged across the U.S., and people started to spend a significant amount of time in coffee shops. This was when cafe culture really started to become a social concept across the country. Well, while the second wave emerged in the late 1970s, it really started to gather speed in the 1980s. This also gave way to the emergence of coffee chains, perhaps. The best example, they say, it's about Starbucks. So let me go on to the business side of coffee. All right, so it's mixed in with history too. So this is entitled "The History and Evolution of Coffee Shop Culture in America." So they go back to saying the origins of coffee shop in America. So in this article, they say that coffee shops first gained popularity in America in the 18th century. And then, it figures specifically focuses in on the aspect of what we think of as the modern concept of a coffee shop. And instead of, talking about the political aspects of how it came to be, tea versus the coffee, why that was more prevalent to the revolutionary aspect of the beginning of the American society. And that's good to put that detailed spin on it instead of just focusing just primarily on the aspect of coffee shops in itself, and which I want, that's my goal too, to go to that extra layer, because with doing that, it gives it the staple and the understanding of how things are shaped in our society, specifically in our American society, and the power and the importance of understanding that there is reasons behind everything that we consume and we think. And so also going into what is stood for and reminding us about the American Republic and what this country was founded on. The aspect that we go against, this country is about going against tyranny and upholding the inalienable rights of the American public. That means ensuring that our state of affairs, as far as our thought process about our going okay, let me reset that back. So what I'm getting at is standing up against the aspect of persecution from which they escaped, and the British persecution in which the Founding Fathers escaped, and setting precedent and holding in that as little as it's not minute, but as how that leaks into the consumer buying power of what was sought after in the first colonization of our American Republic. And so, that's respectful to understand. And it's sad that, these, are called being revolutionaries of today, going against the saying we're trying to make America a whole society again by going against the racist undertones of our founding fathers, and trying to strip that away, but not understanding how at the root of the matter, the founding fathers were about the being open and tolerant and being a republic of people who can stand their ground and have the freedom to do so, to speak their mind without fear of being prosecuted, I'm speaking from a modern day sense of being prosecuted from their liberties or being stripped away from their liberties. That's what they were facing in England. And, needless to say, also, this is a hot button issue, but the aspect of saying, we can't support these founding fathers or other, other staples of American history, of icons of American history, of notable people of American history, because of the racial issue with, let me tie into slavery. But you have to keep in mind that, which a lot of people don't want to understand this and see this, that at that time, they could have still consisted with using slavery. Now that's slavery is something that so many societies have their hands in the blood on their hands about that, but they decided to get rid of it and stop it and abolish it and see that there was a moral corruption, a moral sin to do these things. And also keep in mind that in certain countries, as of today, slavery still exists. And then the slavery still exists in certain aspects as today, as far as the X trade, things like that. And then in certain parts of Africa, and then in Muslim countries, slavery still goes on in those certain aspects. So we gotta, tie all those things together and really get back to the heart of the matter of what's important about our American society, and appreciate that about how we were founded and how we started, and then see things for what it is, the good and the bad. All right, so one of the most famous coffee houses at this time is the Green Dragon, and they go into talking about this in more detail, which was the other gathering place for the Revolutionary War leaders such as Paul Revere and Samuel Adams. Coffee houses was also popular in New York City, where they were known as penny universities because of the low cost of admission. So as of 19th century, and I also, when I did that aspect about coffee, you guys should, you should check that out. That give more detailed analysis of it. So I went in and talked about penny houses and things of that nature. So, check that on out. So as of the 19th century progressed, coffee shops began to take on a more commercial form. So in 1864, the Arbuckle brothers began selling pre-roasted coffee beans in paper bags. Which allowed coffee to be sold in grocery stores and other retail outlets. This led to the rise of coffee as a commodity and paved the way for the modern coffee shop. So the rise of chain coffee shops. The first chain coffee shop in America was A&P, Atlantic and Pacific Coffee, which opened in 1912 in New York City. A&P Coffee was unique in that it offered a wide variety of coffee blends, and was one of the first companies to advertise coffee in newspaper and magazines. This helped to establish coffee as a popular beverage and led to the growth of chain coffee shops throughout the country. Another major player in the early chain coffee shop industry was Starbucks. So, let me reiterate. So, with Starbucks and the political agendas that they have been pushing, specifically going on to in this aspect of the 21st century. So, it's a stark difference, and this again is not upholding to the American roots of the sanctity of which the founding fathers and what this country is founded upon. Of course, that that also begs the question to say that which is great about America, that from all different perspectives, people have a right to speak. But at the same time, when you misuse that right to speak, that causes a lot of problems. And people who are of conservative or Republican or other aspects of the political realm, or libertarian, or so on and so forth. When, for instance, so what am I saying? So, when making headlines about trying to force, political beliefs onto people that don't believe in that, as far as getting in the headlines with Starbucks, with the aspects of putting in the notions of the right to choose, as far as going with, abortion options for their employees and things of that nature. That sets a precedent for, a polarized sort of culture, to where it doesn't deem as a place where it welcomes all sort of thought processes about the aspect of the birth and life, and the protection of birth and life. And me personally, I'm pro-life, but you're saying a lot when you want to push that this is as far as the benefits for your employees, that this is an acceptable right to have for the woman. When you, again, that's one of those hot button topics that you're getting into, when you're not taking the moral ground of that should be something that woman, if she wants to do something along the lines of doing a terrible act like that, let her go on to make that choice for herself outside of the realm of the company. And, just give that option, because you're making a bold statement, I think, to allow something like that to be a part of a benefits package. You're saying that you should view abortion as a normal act, and you shouldn't persecute people for thinking this way, when that's just really getting into murky waters right there. And then the whole aspect too of corporations, now Starbucks isn't the only one that pushes this, but go against pushing the aspects of sexuality, for the instance of saying LGBTQ, that's a right to celebrate that sort of thing, and the culture of the Starbucks culture, or whatever, what have you, and not being open and honest about the reality of the situation, that not everybody is accepting of that, and then that you should be mindful of that. And then it's one of those things where you beg this question too. So for me, being a straight person, that us, our fellow straight people going out in the street saying, "Oh, I love being straight. Look at me," and then rallying out that that's absurd to do something like that, and then people would look at us like, what the heck is the matter with them? Saying, "Oh, it's so beautiful that we are straight," and and delve into things like that. But on the same coin, that's acceptable for a certain specific culture to do so, and we're supposed to celebrate that all the time, and during the month of June. And then even going as far as extent of exposing children to stuff like that. So, I think it's important to keep all these aspects in mind about the breaking down of ideology, and it goes against the heart of the matter of what coffee shops or what products started out and originated to be. But it's also another thing that begs the question that is this something that was, as time goes on along the lines, that this something that was just that it was something that was just eventually going to happen. And I like to know what you all think too. So, either email me or follow me on Substack, X, and of course, fill up those comments and YouTube. And sorry for being tongue-tied. Yeah, it's just one of those things. You know the word, but you just can't get it out. Y'all know what I mean. So let me go to... So Starbucks, on the other hand, was a chain that appealed to a wide audience and offered a more upscale premier coffee experience. This led to the chain of coffee shops through the country, as other countries tried to replicate the success of Starbucks. Today, there are dozens of chains of coffee shops in America, including Dunkin' Donuts, Peak Coffee, and Caribou Coffee. So, in recent years, a new trend has emerged in the coffee shop industry known as the third wave of coffee. And that's quite, to me, how they third wave of coffee. It hints towards that aspect of talking about the feminist movement, how there's waves of it coming in. So I don't know if that's what they're standing for, what they're making that statement by saying that. But it's interesting too how the misuse of language or the rehashing of language, how that shapes there's translations of what things mean throughout time. So this movement is characterized by famous handcrafted coffee and emphasis on sustainability and ethical sourcing. So third wave coffee shops typically roast their coffee beans and place a high value on quality and freshness. They also tend to offer a wide range of brewing methods such as pour over, AeroPress, to name a few. So the third wave of coffee has been driven in part by consumers who are willing to pay a premium price for high quality, ethically sourced coffee too. So it's also been influenced by a growing awareness of the environmental social impact of coffee production and a desire to support small independent coffee farmers. So it goes on to say the history and evolution of coffee shop culture in America is a fascinating topic and one that continues to evolve to this day. So from the early coffee shops to the 18th century to coffee shops of the 20th century and the emergence of the third wave of coffee in recent culture, the coffee shop has played an important role in American culture. And so all right, so also I'm going to chime in on this too and close in on by saying this. So it's I'm going to say the negative aspect of coffee shops of today. That is unfortunate. Coffee shops in its root, it was supposed to be a gathering for people to socialize and talk to one another and, make commentary about the world in which they're living in, either that be political or just, something just that's, talking about your day-to-day life, nothing that's just so politically infused, or, just catching up with loved ones and friends and family in a nice atmosphere, a nice place to welcome things, that kind of rapport with each other. Now you see that you're going to a coffee shop, people are more isolated, because the aspect of either talking on looking at your phone and not really engaging, or just being there certain, specifically with chain coffee shops, just having a place where people sit there and do work, or they sit there and they study. But at the heart of the matter is still, why are they doing that? Why do they choose a coffee shop to do these things? They choose a coffee shop because it's a nice, relaxing atmosphere to, decompress. That's something to also remember too. And it's something to also consider and think about, now with the aspect of single people, now I'm rolling my eyes at this too. So, I'm giving you that tidbit of what I'm saying. So what I mean by single people who choose to be single, even though they say they want somebody or they say they can't find anyone, but they do these ridiculous caveats and to what is acceptable or deemed acceptable as a suitor. So what I'm saying is the aspect of taking somebody on a coffee date. That's one of the things to go around and say that's a no deal or that's a deal breaker, which is nuts to say something like that. That's a really superficial take too, when that's going to a coffee shop is something. Now, this is just from my point of view. You all have your own opinions about it, but I'm just telling it like it is. So, it's a very it's a place where it's neutral, and it's not a whole lot of heightened expectations to where you get the, when you're first learning about somebody and trying to get a feel of their personality. It's a place where not so much is at stake. And so what's wrong with that? And it's also supposed to be a place, coffee shops they give that atmosphere where you can come down and relax and decompress. So what's wrong with that too? And I don't know. It's one of those things. I don't know. But I would like to know too what you all think about the aspect of coffee dates and how women of today are saying, oh, that's not a nice thing to do. That's not acceptable. Me, I don't see what the problem is with that. And I don't know. I like to know what you all think. So this was just the end of the Harboring Light. Tune in, turn up, and absolutely take care out there. Bye-bye now.